Hello, everyone, and welcome to the stream about the DC CW Arrowverse, as it is known. As a rough format, I'm going to spend no longer than 30 minutes covering each of the four shows that currently make up the shared universe, more or less. And those are Arrow, The Flash, Legends of Tomorrow, and Supergirl. Now, as you know, is tradition, there will be spoilers because, that's just the way things work. I'm not going to be going over every episode or every plot line or every detail. I'm just going to go over some general thoughts and impressions I had about each show, its characters, its, quality from season to season, and some things that, occur to me as I watched it. Let's see. As a general statement, though, and hello, chat. Hello, Laura Bones. Hello, Jordan. Hello, Scotch. And also a special hello to Angela, who wasn't able to come for the live broadcast, but will be listening to this after work. Hello, Rotten Corpse. So as a general couple statements first, I am not a big DC aficionado. I'm not nearly as much of an expert on DC Universe stuff as I am Marvel. So for the most part, I came into these shows without any sort of expectations as to how the characters should be portrayed or how the settings should be done or anything like that. My understanding of the DC Universe is, very high level from some of the cartoon shows and a little bit of, osmosis knowledge over the years of just being a comic book freak. So I came in relatively blank. I also came in after having binged The Vampire Diaries, or 13 episodes thereof. So at that point, I was probably ready for anything. The one thing I will say, though, in the general sense, cumulatively, I was far more entertained and had a lot more fun watching the DC TV shows than I have with the Marvel TV shows. Now, that's not to denigrate specific shows in the Marvel grouping. Like Daredevil is still excellent. Season 1 of Daredevil is still, top of the pops. But when you take Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. and all the Netflix stuff and put it together, I had a more consistent good time watching the DC shows than I did the Marvel ones. And I think that's because DC really knows how to do its stuff on TV, really doesn't know how to do its stuff in the movies. Whereas Marvel really knows how to do its stuff in the movies, but not so much on TV. The DC shows are like old-time serials, and they do understand for the most part that these are comic books. They're supposed to be a little bit larger than life. They're supposed to be a little bit more loose with reality, even when sometimes that reality is frustrating or incomprehensible. And incomprehensible in the sense of the title of this stream, A World Without Toilets. Because, and I am glad to be corrected, but at no time in any of these TV shows, Arrow, The Flash, Legends of Tomorrow, or Supergirl, in any situation where someone is in a holding cell, and every show has them, every show has a holding cell for the bad guys, none of these prison cells have toilets. None of these prison cells allow the person inside to relieve themselves. Down to a one. It became, I watched all of these shows with a friend of mine in order to, have somebody to gab with. And, it became very apparent very quickly that there just aren't any toilets for prisoners, for people being held in captivity for whatever reason, whether you're the good guy or the bad guy, which I find really funny. Yeah, and aside from that, there are a series of repeated plot devices in these shows that are very noticeable, even down to certain phrases and words that appear in all of them in one way, shape, or form that can sort of connect the themes, but also it sometimes feel really lazy. But anyway, that's just some general stuff. Let me take a look at the chat real quick before we move on to talk about Arrow. Let's see. Aether Toast says, you managed to sit through Supergirl? Well, there are worse. Yeah, I'll get to Supergirl. One season was easier than the other one, but Scott says, did you hear about DC creating a character named ISIS to oppose Trump? I meant to read more on that before this stream, but I had some real life stuff that kind of distracted me all day. So I only know a high level that they're introducing a character into Legends of Tomorrow named Isis, and that I believe that she's portrayed as a Muslim character. I don't know anything about their intentions behind it. Let's see. And okay, so Arrow. This is my first exposure to Arrow. Now, I came into Arrow, the only information I had was from a couple of friends of mine who said that it was okay. So I came in with my expectations relatively low, that this is going to be a whole ball of cheese and everything else. And now Stephen Amell, who plays Oliver Queen, or the Arrow, his acting quality in that first season, I mean, there are scenes where he is standing there like a cardboard cutout. He does not know how to emote. I was like, I mean, it's weird. He'd be standing there and his arms would be kind of like just slightly off to the sides of his body. Like, you know, those bodybuilders where they can't quite put their arms down all the way. He'd be standing there kind of like that and just stiff as a board. And I thought, okay, well, does this guy know how to act? He got better as time went on, but I was worried there for a second. Now, in the absence of doing a Batman TV show, the Arrow is essentially the Batman of this universe as originally presented in the show. Starling City, later Star City, is a very Gotham-esque sort of presentation. I mean, most of the shows take place at night. Most of the action takes place in the dark. And Arrow, for the first season or so, he's coming back from having been stranded on an island for 5 years. And we start the show with this. He's arriving after having been stranded on an island for 5 years. And apparently between the time that he was shipwrecked and that he reappears back in the city, that a lot has changed and he has changed. And now he's this vigilante, a murderous vigilante. I mean, he is an assassin. He kills people. Now, I was really put off by this at first, but also sort of intrigued because almost to a one, most of the DC superheroes, and most superheroes in general, not all, but most, have a code about killing people. That's not to say they won't in an extreme situation or they won't do something drastic to save another life, but generally their intent is not to go out and kill. But that is the Arrow's intent from the get-go. He's back in town to avenge his father and take down this conspiracy, and one by one he targets these people and kills them. Now, this makes for a very dark themed show, which I hadn't expected. It also causes a whole bunch of moral quandaries for the characters involved because everybody that's helping the Arrow is helping a murderer. And that is one of the weirdest sort of original sins for this show, is that no matter what happens throughout the show, the Arrow has this hanging over his head that he is a murderer. He is a murderer who has gotten away with it. And I have a hard time throughout the 5 seasons sort of squaring that circle, because even though this is fiction and this is a superhero show and everything else, as seriously as they take people who are the villains who kill people, at the same time, I got to say, yeah, but the Arrow is the same. And they do address that. They do address that, and they eventually make that a plot point where he's struggling against what we hear a lot in the Arrow, the darkness. The phrase, the darkness inside me, or fighting against the darkness, this is one of those things that you will hear all the time in Arrow, and you even will hear in Flash from different characters. Fighting against the darkness, you know, fighting against the impulse to do bad with your powers or your abilities or whatever else. But from season to season, the problem, let's see, I don't know if it's a problem, but I guess the thing with the Arrow is, for the first couple of seasons, they're building up to a grand apocalyptic type event that concerns the whole city. Because the Arrow's big line is, when he confronts one of these people that he's going to assassinate, or later on just a villain in general, he will say, the person's name, like Joe Smith, you have failed this city, and then he will kill them. So the focus for the Arrow is to protect the entire city from corruption and from all this other stuff. And so as each season goes on, the threats must be citywide. And the Arrow's team grows over time to accommodate for these grand threats. In the first season, it was a family drama, it was a mystery, and it was also 2 shows in one. Arrow spends at least half of its time flashing back to Oliver's life on the island, at least until the point at which he's not on the island. Because we have 5 years worth of events that we only hear about in abstract starting in the first season. And each season essentially covers not only a year in the life of the Arrow and his adventures in real time, but also a year of his life back on the island in chronological order, supposedly leading up to the point at which, he comes back home. Now, when I watched the first season, I thought, oh God, is this flashback subplot going to be like its own version of Lost? We're stuck on an island and we have to keep coming up with reasons why the island is special, or something happens on this island for 5 years that he can never get a signal out, that he can never escape it. Well, no, they solved that pretty quick because he doesn't spend the whole 5 years on the island. They find reasons for him to get off the island, but of course, during that time, he's never discovered, he's never identified, he never contacts his family, even though he's within 10 feet of them a couple of times. The flashbacks are interesting. They allow for some mirroring of plots and themes, and also to sort of explain the backstory to events in real time by showing like how they were spurred on by events in the past. And God, the Arrow just goes the gamut. I mean, the Ra's al Ghul and the League of Assassins, Black Canary, God, Count Vertigo, Deathstroke. Oh man. Okay, let's talk some individual characters here real quick. Let's talk about the Arrow team. So Arrow's best friend, at least in the first part of things, is John Diggle, who originally starts out as Oliver Queen's personal bodyguard, but then eventually discovers his night job being a vigilante. They have such a bromance going on between like season 1 and 3 that it's just almost, it's actually kind of endearing, just how much they sort of play off of each other and they sort of know each other so well. And John Diggle eventually, of course, has to become a superhero himself. My friend and I, my friend mostly just called him Helmet, even though his code name is Spartan. He just has this very distinctive helmet for the first time that he goes out into the superhero world, so we just call him Helmet. Who else is on the team? Oh, yes, Felicity Smoke. This character is the love interest of the Arrow. Apparently was not meant to be a long-term character, but she, pulled so well with fans that they brought her in from a temporary character to a long-term. Felicity. So Felicity is the staging point for most of my frustration with a lot of the storylines in the show. And I'll get to that in a minute because that reaches on to other shows. Thea Queen is Oliver's sister. She starts out as this sort of party girl, whatever, and then she grows up and finds out that who she is isn't really who she thinks she is, and then she becomes a superhero. And what happens in Arrow with the evolution of these characters is mirrored a lot in The Flash. We'll get to that too. Sorry for all these putting offs, but I want to make sure I cover everything in sort of order. Who else on Team Arrow? Well, there's also the Lances. So Laurel Lance was Oliver Queen's old flame, and she still kind of is for the first season or so, until that becomes sort of impossible, all things considered. There's some notion that they'll get back together. There's a lot of tension with that. It's decent. It's all right. Captain Lance, Quentin Lance. I love this guy. I love this character. He has his failing points later on in the series, but he's sort of like the grounding character. He's the guy that's not involved in all the superhero stuff and all the really weird stuff. He's sort of the voice of reason half the time. The actor that plays him, and I don't know actors' names, so don't hold me to account for that. But every time that he's on the screen for those first few seasons, I'm just happy because I just like him. I like his attitude. I like the way the actor portrays him. But let's see. Yeah, so Arrow is the Batman analog. Now, this is the dark, sort of gritty underworld type stuff. Now, as the seasons progress, we go from really, really dark to more lightweight. It doesn't get quite comedic. I mean, there are comedic moments. But for the most part, the Arrow stays serious and grim, even to the point of like comedy grim, where it's just like grim for the sake of being grim. And that's a nice playoff with the Flash, who's far lighter in tone. Now, the character of Deathstroke. So, someone else that is trapped on the island with Oliver in the 5 years past is this guy who eventually becomes Deathstroke, who is this super duper assassin. His name's Slade Wilson. He's like this combat master. And when Oliver first gets on the island, he's just a rich, spoiled brat. He doesn't know anything. But he eventually learns to use a bow and arrow and survive and everything else. And there's this brother relationship that is forged between him and Slade Wilson on this island as they survive things together, as they overcome obstacles and everything else. Of course, there comes a point at which they separate and they become enemies, and this carries over into mostly the second season in real time, because we're dealing with two different time periods in each show. I don't mean to ramble. It's just really hard to sort of give a general sense of these things. The show is consistently entertaining. The storylines, the overarching plot for each season is usually leading up to some, like I said, some citywide catastrophe. In the first season, it's relatively novel because we don't know what is happening. We don't know what everything is leading up to. We don't know what the grand plan is with the bad guys. But as each successive season goes on, it's sort of like, okay, now we're waiting for whatever the big world-ending event is going to be, where the government barely gets involved, the police can't do anything, and only Arrow and his team can solve it and that kind of thing. But the apocalypse of each season starts to change in about season 4 and on to season 5, where they take away so much from threatening the city and make it more about threatening Oliver Queen himself and his psyche and his sense of self and everything else. Because Oliver Queen's struggle from beginning to end is everything that he had to do to survive on the island, all of the morals he had to set aside in order to survive, as compared with trying to maintain a moral center in what he does and how he does it back in the city. Now, of course, love and felicity and everything else kind of draws him to try to balance him out, but he's always very pragmatic. He's always very no nonsense in a lot of things, and very dark, always dark and emo, very emo. Now, this gets put to the test when we eventually find out that he has a son that he didn't know he had. And now suddenly, aside from his friends, which he's always worried about, he's always going out to protect them and everything else, now he has actual like family. And this is important. Family is very important in Arrow because of the events that lead up to about season 2 or 3, Arrow's mother, his father, the legacy of the Queen family, and all this other stuff. So when he finds out he has a son, this complicates things even further, and he becomes more of a sense of a protector. In season 5, after a whole bunch of crazy events, Oliver is really confronted with the horrible things he did in the first and second seasons, mostly, by a villain who sort of holds him to account. I'm not going to give everything away in case people want to watch this, of course, but his greatest nemesis kind of shows up. And almost all of his nemeses have to be people who use bows and arrows. This is another thing that you'll find in these TV shows with the villains, or the super big bad villains. They have to be some kind of mirror through a mirror darkly sort of version of the hero themselves. And I understand that's not a completely original idea, but having everybody with bows and arrows or having everybody be a speedster, a little bit too much on the nose. Regardless, Oliver is held to account for his moral failings in season 5. And in a sense, the villain that does this to him is sort of like, for me, the back of my head throughout the entire series, going like, yeah, he's trying to be a hero, but he killed a whole bunch of people. I mean, sure, they were criminals and they might have been lousy people, but, he took it upon himself to take their lives. He's effectively no better than anybody else, thinking that they're in the right to do it. So the 5th season is actually really kind of weird, because on the one hand, I'm not rooting for the villain per se, but on the other, it's like, well, Oliver had this coming in one way, shape, or form, and I'm glad they finally addressed it. And gosh, what else to say about this? Arrow is consistently good and entertaining, except for the constant need to have relationship drama with Felicity. There are so many points, I mean, or whether it's Felicity or early in the season's Laurel, there always has to be some stupid reason why some rift appears between Oliver and his love interest. Now sometimes it's something understandable, like the love interest gets killed or resurrected or killed again, depending on the situation. Sometimes it's completely manufactured and stupid. And I'm going to talk about the one that pisses me off the most. And that is when Felicity finds out that Oliver has a son. This was a secret that Oliver was keeping because the fewer people that knew about it, the less chance that anyone could reveal that information, accidentally or otherwise, to anybody else and put the kid under threat. It's what the kid's mom asked him to do and swear to, and he kept to it for her protection and to, respect her. And this is understandable on his part, but as soon as Felicity finds out, oh, you had a son you never told me, I can't trust you. And this is like in a season 3 or 4 or whatever, and I'm like, no. This guy has saved your life a zillion times over. This guy has risked everything for you. This guy has proclaimed his love for you. You've gone through all this stuff. You cannot understand the reasoning behind him keeping it a secret at this stage of the game after everything you have been through as a quasi-superhero? No, but they insert it. And manufacturing romantic drama, tension, breakup, and everything else is a common theme in all of these shows. Not so much in Legends of Tomorrow. They're focused on a bunch of other things, but certainly in The Flash and certainly in Supergirl as well. And I don't think, and I'll lead into The Flash with this, I don't think the Arrow could have stood on its own for as long as it had without the crossovers from the other shows. I think each of these shows, while very solid overall on their own, they all benefit from operating in the same universe more or less. We'll get to that too as we get into The Flash and definitely Supergirl. I'm going to go to chat real quick. So guys, I should have said this at the top too. If you have any questions or comments on the show that I'm discussing at this segment, by all means, put them into the chat. I'll set aside about 5 or 10 minutes at the end of each segment to take those questions. If you had questions or had comments previously, please repost them now and I'll take a look. Let's see. Let me take a look back real quick. Scribe, what do you think of the Muslim woman superhero in Legends of Tomorrow? I only know very little about that. I meant to look up more about it before this stream. I'm going to have to follow that up on maybe the Lords of the Night stream tonight after I looked up some stuff. Let's see. Oh, yes, Dolph Lundgren. Dectron brings us up. There are some really interesting cameo casting choices in all of these shows. The one that was really cool, and Deck just mentioned it, Dolph Lundgren shows up as a Russian mob boss in, I believe it's season 4, in the flashbacks to the events that occurred before he escaped the island. And it took me a minute because I was like, is that? It is. It's the Punisher, because Dolph Lundgren was the first Punisher on film. Fernandez says, except the musicals. Yeah, okay, we'll get to the musicals. Oh, God, but that's Flash and Supergirl. We'll get to the musicals sooner or later. Kelvin Robinson says, didn't Green Arrow kill people in one of the renditions? I don't know. Like I say, my understanding of DC Universe stuff is high-level, non-comic book reader knowledge. So how these characters were portrayed in the TV shows and how accurate they are to their comic book counterparts, I don't know for sure, except in like a really general sense. Alice Morgan, what did you think of Laurel's training in the show? Yes, when Laurel becomes the Black Canary, she sucks. I hate to say it. The way that they portray her, especially in the early stages of her career, she's useless. I mean, she keeps screwing up, or she keeps being hamstrung by one thing or another. She goes out on missions, or they take her along, and and it's the way the character's written. It's the way the situations are played out. She's ineffective, let's say. But it was interesting to see and wonder how, because after you've seen Arrow and you start watching The Flash, and you start to wonder, okay, what is going to happen to this currently mundane character to turn them into some kind of superhero? Like, are they going to get struck by lightning? Are they just going to be a tech person? Is something weird going to happen to them? So as when Laurel became the Black Canary, I was kind of like, okay, so what's Diggle going to become? And what's Thea going to become? And so on, and so on, and so on. What else? Let's see. Laurel got no training. I hate to see that was Black Canary. They eventually trained her, or he like Oliver took her up on training, and they did sort of some supplementary stuff. But yeah, she initially started out just doing it on her own with her friendly neighborhood boxing instructor or whatever. And that character came and went real quick. We never saw him again. Because that guy was the son or the nephew of some previous superhero. And I don't believe we ever heard from him again. Scribe Light, have you already talked about the Invasion crossover, says Comer's. No, I have not. I haven't talked. I'm only talking about the shows in general first, and I'll get to the big stuff later on. Okay, well, after that rambling review of Arrow, dead center within, I believe it was the 2nd or 3rd season, we are introduced to Barry Allen, who comes into the Arrow TV show as a visiting forensics guy from Central City. And he quite quickly, finds out who Oliver Queen is and all this other stuff. And he's a normal human being at this point. After his episode or 2 cameo in Arrow, he goes back to his job in Central City and is subsequently struck by lightning, which turns him into the Flash. Let's see. Oh, Shady Grin. Scribe Light. Thea's going with her biological father, and her disgust with her family made no sense to me. How about you? Yeah, that seemed a little manufactured. That seemed a little too convenient, that she would just suddenly shrug off her family and go like, oh, let me go with the guy who probably arranged for the downfall of my own family that raised me, and is also a supervillain by all measure. And I'll just go off with him to Corto Maltese, or whatever it was called, and train to become a ninja warrior. That was, yeah, there are a lot of sort of convenient decisions made by characters in some of these shows that don't make a whole lot of sense. They push the plot forward, obviously, but it's sort of like, would a rational person make that choice, all things considered? That was one of the ones that, yeah. But I'll tell you, Malcolm Merlyn, he's one of those bad guys you love to hate, just because John Barrowman plays him so. It's just watching him have fun just in the TV shows. And that's the other thing too. I'll say this before I get into The Flash. I always got a sense, and I could be wrong, but that the people on these shows were genuinely having fun and genuinely became friends in real life doing shows like this, because you have that vibe in almost all of these shows of family, of connection, of you get a sense that these people like each other outside of the job, because it looks like everybody's having a good time in doing what they're doing. Let's see. The boxer died, Scribe. Did he? Oh yeah, that's right. See, now you can go into details on specific episodes if you like. I don't remember everything that happened because I binge watched all of these shows like every day for the last 3 months or something. There wasn't a day that went by that I didn't watch 1 or 2 episodes of these things, just getting them all down. So if I forget specific details and things or mix up chronologies, there you go. But speaking of mixing up chronologies, we have The Flash. Now, The Flash, as an analog, if Arrow is the Batman of the Arrowverse, then The Flash is the Superman of the Arrowverse, because unlike Arrow, and you know that you can see this from the very first episode, most of the action takes place in the daytime. Like, you see, there's bright lights, there's color, there's smiles. Like, Barry Allen is a happy guy. He's a relatively positive guy. He has fun being a superhero. There's a sense of joy in those first couple of seasons with the stuff that he has to go through, for the most part. And what I was really impressed by was the effects. The visual effects in the Flash were amazing to me. I thought for a television show that has to do this every week, they really have it down, and specifically with Gorilla Grodd. So if you see the episodes where Gorilla Grodd, when they do show him, they obviously spend a lot of time doing, like, smoke and mirrors and shadows and off-camera stuff. But when Grodd is active and is doing stuff, very impressed with the level of special effects that you can bring to television now, and make it really work, especially when you're dealing with people who are moving faster than the speed of light and all that other kind of stuff. So Barry Allen is a forensic scientist that works for Central City Police Department. Many years ago, his mother was murdered by some, mysterious entity. But of course, the police believe that his father did it, and so he was convicted of the mother's murder. It's sort of a fugitive kind of thing with a one-armed man kind of deal. And so Barry's lived his whole life being raised by, oh God, please don't tell me, Jesse Martin. The actor, Jesse Martin, Detective West, yes. Joe West, sorry. It's one of those things where you know everything, and then when you try to say it out loud, it just blanks. But anyway, so he's raised by Detective Joe West and his daughter, Iris West, who is his same age, and they were schoolmates before Barry's mother was murdered. And they grow up, and he grows up being raised by them, and he gets a job at the police station, of course. And throughout his entire life, he's been trying to track down or figure out who really killed his mom, because he knows his dad didn't. He was the only witness. And his pleas that it wasn't my dad, it was the man in the yellow suit who did it. And so this has been, haunting him his whole life. But anyway, so there's a science experiment that takes place at Star Labs with basically a collider, was it the fusion collider or whatever it was called? And there's an explosion. It causes a crazy lightning storm, and Barry Allen is struck by lightning. And it's a combination of this plus the radiation waves or whatever from the science experiment explosion that not only alters his body chemistry, but a whole host of other people. And for the most part, that event is the worldwide, for the sake of the Arrowverse, radioactive spider bite that initiates so many characters and villains and offshoots that we will see over the course of these other shows. So the first season of the Flash is really good. I really liked it. It took me a little while to warm up to the supporting characters of Cisco and oh God, am I really going to do this with every character? I just can't remember. Caitlin Snow. Sorry, Cisco and Caitlin Snow. And Tom Cavanaugh plays Harrison Wells, who's like this master scientist, sort of Stephen Hawking combined with Steve Jobs sort of figure. and he was injured and lost his ability to walk because of the explosion. And over the course of the first season, we slowly come to learn not only the extent of Barry's powers, but also the dangers of them. And we slowly come to know who the real villain is in the whole story. It's really well done. I was really impressed with it. I really liked it. I look forward to the episodes. The problem, overall, it's both a problem and a blessing, depending on how you look at it. One of the things that is endemic to the Flash comic books, at least in the modern age, is the fact that the Flash can move so fast that he can break the time barrier effectively. And so Barry Allen, early on in these 3 seasons that have been out so far, learns that he can travel back in time or travel forward in time in certain situations. And this is where not only the Flash, but the other shows, in a way, kind of start to go off the rails. The convenience and the complexities of deciding to introduce time travel into a show, and especially time travel where the actions you take will change the future and everything else, cause all types of crazy stuff. Now, it can be used to good effect if you're trying to reboot a series, per se, like, let's admit, Star Trek. When they rebooted Star Trek for the movies, the use of time travel to explain this offshoot timeline where they could do whatever they wanted and still go back and deal with the original series stuff, it was a very simple but effective excuse for doing what they did. And in the Flash, by changing the events of the past, they are able to introduce new characters into the series that weren't there previously. Because in season 3, we're suddenly presented with a whole bunch of characters that didn't exist before. Because, the timeline's been changed, and the effects of that have caused all these other things to happen. And I'm really torn on the whole time travel thing, because it's kind of a cheat on one hand. Excuse me, I had to take a drink. And it's also, I don't know, it adds so many other complex questions to the whole thing. Like, if time travel exists and all these speedsters exist and everything else, then how do they not know what's going to happen to them and everything else? It's just, it starts to give you a headache after a while. And I understand, shouldn't overthink it. It's a comic book show and everything else. But the problem is, when they establish these rules in the show, there's an expectation, in my brain at least, that they be followed relatively closely. Because for as much time travel is going on, we never see Barry Allen get eaten by a time wraith when he totally should. They introduce these things called time wraiths that are sort of these immune system for the fabric of time and space, that if you mess around with the time stream, they will come and eat you or carry you off into oblivion or something. And except for one instance, other people are chased by these time police things. Barry, not so much. But Barry Allen's a very likable character. His puppy dog love romance with Iris West is cute. And thankfully, there's a complication in the first season where she's seeing someone else. And so there's this tension, of course. And then by the time we get to the end of the first season, that resolves itself quite tragically, which causes all types of other complications. And for the most part, not completely, but for the most part, the romance between Barry and Iris stays fairly consistent throughout the shows. There are moments at which they have to inject the, I can't do this. Both in Arrow and the Flash, the hero has to go at some point to his paramour, his love interest, or the paramour to the hero, or whatever, says, we can't do this. I can't do this anymore. I can't take it. Or blah, blah, blah. And it's always just so like, oh, come on, guys, just stop it. Either you're with it or you're not. And it's not going to change just because, I can't deserve this, or I have to go do something else. Oh, and also, as another general thing, some variation on the phrase, you don't have to do this alone, or you're not alone in this. You will hear this said to the hero or from the hero in all of these shows at one time or another, multiple times throughout any particular season. Always, it's always the person going like, no, it's my responsibility and I have to take care of it. We go like, you don't have to do this alone, Barry. Or Oliver, you're not alone in this. And it happens so many times you would have thought, maybe once or twice it makes sense, but after the third time, don't you all know that you're a team? Don't you all get it? And there are some legitimate sort of points of contention that come up where, it's sort of like, well, by messing around with time, you may have caused my brother to die. Yeah, that's kind of a sticking point. Anyway, so the Flash suffers from kind of the similar situation as most superheroes. You have to come up with villains who can stand on their own against the hero. And when you have a hero that can move faster than people can see, almost all of the villains that are actually any threat to the hero have to also be speedsters. And this is the sort of frustrating recurrence in each season so far, is that the big threat is another speedster, some monster-looking guy in crazy armor or crazy outfit that opposes the Flash on his own turf in the Speed Force or going really fast. And of course, they come up with different backstories and reasons why these guys exist or what they're doing. It just gets a little tiring when it's every season the main bad guy is another speedster. They couldn't have made the main bad guy. I mean, the Flash has a rogues gallery nearly as long as Batman's. They could have come up with somebody to make the big bad guy instead of another speedster over and over again, but they do. And the Flash is the combination of the Flash and the Arrow is also where we get a whole bunch of characters that will be spun off into their own show. Like we get Captain Cold, and at the time it was Heatwave, Mick Rory, who I guess he changed his name to like Firestarter or something by the time. He kind of drops his code name by the time we get to Legends of Tomorrow. But we're also introduced from Arrow, we're introduced to Ray Palmer, who becomes the Atom. And let's see, who else? God, there's so many people here. Yeah, Mick Rory, Leonard Snart. Oh, man, that's so silly. Yeah, and then, and Firestorm. Firestorm is the combination of two people, which is a really weird superhero setup, but it's interesting. You got a professor and interchangeable guy, because it starts off with guy number one in the first season of the first or second season of the Flash, and then it becomes guy number two by the second season of the Flash. It's complicated, but the Flash is really where all the supervillains and other superheroes sort of arise from in a supernatural or superpowered sense. Arrow is relatively grounded. Most of the villains and most of the heroes in that one, save up until the fifth season, are down-to-earth, sort of mostly human, if not slightly enhanced by drugs or something people. Flash is all about, the products of science and technology and that kind of thing. And there are hints of mysticism / magic in both shows. Yeah, the Flash is the flashpoint for a lot of the expansion of characters and scenarios because of the time hopping, because of the dimensional shifting. That's the other thing, going to alternate dimensions. Going to alternate dimensions, sort of like time shifting, allows them to bring back characters that either died or reimagine characters that already existed in the show because they're doppelgangers coming over from somewhere else. And the success of this is mostly rested in the character of Harrison Wells, who we see as one character in season one, who is actually not that character. It's complicated. Then we see the real Harrison Wells in season two, from a different dimension. And then he has to go, so they decide to bring in version 3 of Harrison Wells, who's a completely different character and is valuable in his own right, and really more so at the end of season 3, in a way I honestly didn't see coming. And I'm not going to give away too many spoilers, but man, I did not see the end of what happened to that Harrison Wells in season 3. I didn't see that coming. I was surprised. Let me go to this chat real quick. Let's see. Eldris says, I want Deathstroke from Arrow to have his own series. They've been talking about that. I've heard rumors that they're thinking about that. I wouldn't be surprised if they were able to spin that off. Jesse Green says, I like the fact that Mark Hamill came back as Trickster and Barry's dad plays the Flash in the 90s TV show. Yes, that's the other thing, too. There are a lot of callbacks to... There was an old Flash TV series in the 90s. I watched it when it was out. The guy who played the Flash in that show plays Barry's dad in this show. The lady who played Barry Allen's girlfriend, love interest in the 90s show, plays a scientist in the new Flash show. Mark Hamill, who played the Trickster in the old Flash series, comes back in this Flash series as, of course, an older version of himself who had operated as the Trickster in the years past, like back in the 90s, except they don't talk about there being a Flash. He was just a criminal that ran around and did stuff. There's obviously a lot of love and a lot of respect for the universe, the actors, sort of the established bits and pieces of not only lore for the comics, but also lore in the broadcasts of previous shows that involved people. And that was really nice to see. It's really nice to see that you've got this people who are making these shows really understand and respect not only the universe of the characters, but also the universe of the people involved with these characters over time. And that's really nice. Commiserant says, Scribe Light, the Constantine character was the actual character and actor from the failed NBC show Constantine. Yes. NBC tried to do a show called Constantine, thankfully using someone who was actually British with an accent, unlike the Keanu Reeves movie. That show failed, but they've kept that actor, and I don't know his name, but he's shown up in Arrow in one of the flashback sequences, and he showed up in The Flash, I believe, didn't he? Or am I mistaken? Because I know he was in Arrow. No, actually, I don't think he showed up in Flash yet. No, I don't think he did. He should, though, if he hasn't already. I might be misremembering. Let's see. What else? And he should get his own show again. I think if they tied in a Constantine show with this universe, they'd be set. Let's see. Flashpoint, yes, Elseworlds, yeah. And this is the other thing too, with all this contradiction between having a Flash TV series and having a Flash in the movies and everything. The one big conceit that used to be relatively unique to DC was these infinite Earths, these alternate dimensions. So everything happening in the DC movies, that could totally just be Earth 772 or something, and all these shows could exist in the same sort of continuity with everything else. And how are you going to have Crisis on Infinite Earths at some point if you don't have like the various iterations of Superman make appearances in like taking old footage and using computers to make it, new or something like they did with all the old Doctor Who things. Let's see. Isn't Mercury the older version of the Flash? Well, no, he was called the Flash. There's the Golden Age version of these characters in the comic books, like the Green Lantern, the Flash, and so on. And then there's the Silver Age, which is the character versions, or at least aesthetically speaking, that we're more familiar with. The Flash you see with the Mercury helmet with the wings and all that stuff. They worked that into the show, and I was really glad to see that they did that. They came up with some really creative ways to slice all these different versions of the characters from the comic books into one continuity in a very creative way and logical way for the most part. So Barry Allen, let me go back real quick. The Flash has similar struggles to Oliver Queen, except in the sense that the Flash from the get-go wants to be the good guy. He doesn't want to hurt people. He's not in this to cause harm. He's in this to fix things, to help people, to save things. And it is this overriding desire to fix, it's sort of the quantum leap thing, to put right what once went wrong that causes the most problems, because he decides at one point that he's going to go back in time and stop his mother from being murdered. And of course, this causes all sorts of havoc in the timeline and is basically the starting point for a whole bunch of ripple effects, not only in the Flash TV show, but in small parts of Arrow, and certainly in Legends of Tomorrow, which we'll get to soon. And he's put to the test when, in a reversal, and there's a joke in there for fans of the show, by the third series, it's not something that happened in the past that he has to fix. It's something that he knows will happen in the future that he has to try to prevent using very sketchy information. Now, the third season of Flash is probably one of the most emotional roller coasters of the entire series so far. I was not happy with as long as it took for us to get from point A to point B, because it takes a really long build-up time, and it is a too slow burn getting from the events that we are shown early on in season 3 to where we finally meet up with them near the end of season 3. There's a lot of filler. But overall, the sense of dread, the sense of impending doom, the small little successes when they think they've figured out a piece of the puzzle or something. Season 3 is probably, I think, my favorite season of The Flash overall, because it had enough of that emotional dichotomy stuff going on. There are some weak points. The heel turn that Caitlin Snow takes into supervillain territory, I mean, to me, it's never fully explained. It's like, well, are her powers like a separate personality? Is it like schizophrenia or something, or MPD? What else? The Harrison Wells stuff is funny in the show and serves as some comic relief, and the character becomes more endearing as time goes on. But it's in the beginning, it's really difficult to see how does this guy fit, and maybe that was the point, because by the time you get to the end of season 3, it's like, oh well, he made up for it. What else? Oh, I meant to mention something. This is going back to Arrow real quick. There's one character in Arrow, I think he shows up in season 3 or 4, that annoyed the hell out of us, me and my friend watching this. And that was Curtis. Because when Felicity's basically the computer expert, organizer, person in the chair, telling the superhero what's going on, searching for stuff, researcher. When events in the show take Felicity out of that role, they introduce a character named Curtis. And Curtis, he's too special for his own good, and it was really obnoxious. He comes in, it's like, hi, I'm Curtis. I'm a computer expert. Oh, also, I'm a material science expert. Oh, also, I'm an Olympian level, triathlete or something, and I want a gold medal. Oh, and I'm also gay, and oh, I'm also married, and oh, my husband is this. It's like every scene with Curtis showing up was annoying, because I'm like, stop. None of this matters. And if it does matter, let it show up organically, because it's like every other sentence was just, here's this special thing in some checkbox list somewhere that makes me a really special character. Like, I didn't care. I would have, and he doesn't, and as far as I'm concerned, he doesn't get any better as time goes on, when he eventually becomes his own superhero, quote unquote, Mr. Terrific. Ugh. Oh, God. Yeah, season 5 of Arrow, it starts out really weak. It really does. I'm sorry I'm going back here for a second, but I just got to say, the recruiting of the new super team after the team kind of broke up, the Ragman, the character with the supernatural super suit, he was the most interesting character, and then he kind of leaves like a third of the way through the season. Just say, I got to go. I can't deal with this. I can't deal with the fact that Felicity did this thing that, caused a whole bunch of crazy crap to happen to me in season 4, and I got to go. It's like, oh God. But yeah, Curtis especially, just go away. Let me go back to chat real quick. Jesse says, I really didn't like the Mad Dog guy. Mad Dog is a really tough character. Yeah, almost all of the new teammates were difficult to get into, because they were as artificially inserted into the situation as, you know, both in the plot and in the story, because like, oh, we need to recruit new people. Here are some people, ta-da, and they all have a different thing, except that this one character is running around like Jason Voorhees. And there are scenes where you've got Mad Dog, who wears a hockey mask and uses guns and shoots people, which I thought, isn't this what Arrow was trying to get away from? But there are scenes where the guy in the hockey mask is telling people, like I think it was at a carnival or something. There was a carnival and people were being shot at, or there's some terrorists they're looking for. And this guy in a hockey mask shows up and he starts trying to tell people, get to safety or something. When I thought, if a guy in a hockey mask with guns in his hand is running up to you in the middle of a crisis, this is not a guy that you see as a hero. This is a guy that you see as one of the terrorists. It just didn't make any sense. I was like, oh my God. Let's see. Eldris says, also with the Flash you have from season 1, the ever-present news article from the future, the Flash disappears in crisis. Yes, there's a sort of maybe not a MacGuffin, but there's this sort of plot point where there's a news article from the future. It's sort of like the photograph of Marty McFly and his parents from Back to the Future. It's sort of a placeholder of this is something that happens in the future. Of course, no details are given somehow, even though you have the full news article there and you could just read it to find out what happened. But they only go off of the headline and specifically who wrote the article, because those become plot points. What else? Sean Boley 74 says, Scribe, do you remember the part where Barry gets a call from his mom when he is in the past? That made me tear up a little. Yeah, now there are a lot of genuine tear-jerking moments in The Flash. I didn't get so many in Arrow, but in The Flash, when it comes to his mother, when it comes to the acting of Grant Gustin, when it comes to the romance between him and Iris and some of the other things, there was a real sense of, like I said before, family and connection and caring between these characters and the actors themselves. It felt like there was a real connection between all of them. That made it much more powerful when dramatic things happen, because for the most part, when something dramatic happens to one of these characters, whether it's a death or, like you say, like, you know, Barry hears from his mother, the emotion that you get from that has been earned. It's been explained. It's been led up to. It's supported by things that we've seen over the course of the show. And that's when those things are done right. If you just sort of insert them without any preamble or anything else, it just feels like, whatever. Sorry, I took another drink. Let's see. The Flash. Let's see. What do I want to do? Do I want to do Legends of Tomorrow first or Supergirl? I think I'll say Supergirl for last, because I think I just watched that the most recently, so it's most fresh in my mind. Yeah, so between The Flash and Arrow, several supporting characters and heroes and villains are generated. You have well, the first Black Canary, which was Sarah Lance, sister of Laurel Lance. That was back in Arrow, who eventually becomes the White Canary, although she's not called that very often. You have Firestorm. You have Captain Cold. You have Mick Rory, Heat Wave or whatever. You have the Atom, Ray Palmer. You have Hawkgirl and Hawkman, and God, who else? Who am I forgetting here? I think that's most of everybody from the. Anyway, so you have all these extra characters that, in their own rights, have some interesting backstories or have some interesting attitudes to them. And Calvin Robinson says Sarah is the true Black Canary. Yes, every person who has attempted to take up the mantle of Black Canary after Sarah Lance has faltered. Laurel came the closest, I think, by the time that she, met her end, so to speak. But yeah, anybody and everybody else. And they're going to bring in a new one that I hear in the next season of Arrow. They were trying to make a or they're going to take the character that they were trying to make the Black Canary in season 5, and she will be the Black Canary, or it's going to be a completely new character. I'm not sure. I only know bits and pieces of what's going to happen in season 6 of Arrow. But anyway, you have all these extra characters that by their own rights are pretty popular, but by themselves probably couldn't support a single show. So what do? Well, we take all these characters and we create a new show called Legends of Tomorrow. And Legends of Tomorrow, somehow Legends of Tomorrow gets to break all the rules of time travel that supposedly were set in The Flash and use that, mechanism as its main plot point and story driving machinery, I should say, for the show. The idea behind Legends of Tomorrow is you have this group of people, I'm not going to say race of people, who are Time Lords. I mean, sorry, not Time Lords, Time Masters. We couldn't say Time Lords because that would be too close to Doctor Who, which this thing kind of edges into in places. So these Time Masters are the keepers of the timeline. And one of them goes rogue because he's trying to prevent his family from being killed in the future. Sort of like a reversal of The Flash, another inside joke there. And so this Time Master goes rogue, takes his spaceship, time machine ship, and goes back in time to collect all of these superheroes and supervillains together because he needs a team of people because they are going to become legends in the future, and he's grabbing them now for their talents now in order to help him solve the problem of the time stream and everything else. And so you have this super team of mixture of personalities and motivations and everything all together. This show is kind of fun because there's the banter between the characters, especially Captain Cold and Mick Rory are the heroes of this show. This show would not be nearly as entertaining if those characters weren't there and the actors portraying them weren't portraying them the way they are, especially Mick Rory by season 2. So you have this sort of motley crew, seriously, of a ship flying through time, solving problems in era-specific situations. So you get to see the 50s and the 80s and, the 40s and all these other things, these period pieces where they're running around with their laser guns and doing crazy things. And violating all the laws and the rules established in The Flash as to how you handle time travel, if you handle it at all, and seemingly without any consequences. I kept waiting between the 2 seasons to see some time wraiths show up and eat them. I mean, attack our heroes. There is a time wraith of a kind that shows up in season 2 for a different character, but man. And it's a fun show. So every episode they're going to a different time period and they're having a different adventure against dinosaurs or this, that, and the other thing. And there is an overarching plot to each one. But the entertainment value comes really from the character interactions and the goofy, situations they get up to in different parts of history. It's a good supplementary show to the other shows, but it's the most goofy of all of them. It's the one that takes itself the least seriously, which I can appreciate because, Arrow's all dark. Flash, for the most part, is relatively lighthearted. This one is just sort of like, this is a comic book, and we know it's a comic book, and we're just going to sort of run around and have fun with it. So I appreciate that. Let's see. Alice Morgan says, Legends of Tomorrow. Let's knock off Doctor Who and reuse all the characters that we killed off for emotional effect. Yeah, that's the thing with time travel. Like I said, you can keep bringing back characters or alternate versions thereof a lot. And they did that as well in season 2 of Legends of Tomorrow. It was nice to see, but at least they didn't make it all lovey-dovey. They made it make sense as to why the character that we see that they bring back in season 2 is certainly not the character as we last saw him, because they bring him from a different period in his life. So that kind of made sense. I'm still trying to figure out how or why Mick saw Captain Cold in his mind prior to that. They never really explained that. Is he really hallucinating? Is a time thing? Maybe they'll go into that in season 3. Not sure. Jesse Green says, I love the Justice Society in the show. That was an interesting twist to sort of show the superheroes have been active in one way, shape, or form for a long time, which also makes it kind of weird when they start talking about metahumans in the Flash show in the present, so to speak, as though this is some kind of new thing. Like this is the first time, except there have been people that have been turning into shadow and protecting the president and flying around. And I understand overthinking, applying too much logic here, but all the same, you know. But yeah, seeing a sort of antiquated sort of 40s golden age type superheroes running around for an episode or 3 was kind of cool. Let's see. Cormezranth. I don't even know how to pronounce. You're gonna have to phonetically spell out your handle there at some point, so we're not always messing it up. Scribe, I'm kind of surprised they were allowed to get away with all the pop culture references to the extent they did with like Star Wars and Lord of the Rings, etc. Yeah, they do visit on a lot of nerd stuff. Indiana Jones, Star Wars. I mean, they're making reference of it. They're not using any imagery from it or anything, just mentionings and such, and characters that are effectively historical figures. I mean, George Lucas is a historical figure at this point, so using his likeness, or at least his name, isn't, I don't think it violates copyright per se, because it's not a representation of things. It's sort of just like offhanded mentionings of stuff. But yeah, but it is interesting to see a whole bunch of references to properties from completely different companies and completely different places into Legends of Tomorrow. But that also sort of brings in the audience a little bit, because the kind of people that are going to be watching Legends of Tomorrow are probably already fans of stuff like that, or probably should be. Now, there's not much to say about Legends of Tomorrow. It's kind of a, like I said, it's kind of a romper room kind of thing. There's a little bit of a relationship drama here and there, but it's really just sort of event after event, one thing to the other. The overarching plots of each season are not really that important. I mean, it's just sort of an excuse to go traveling through time and having different adventures with different costumes and things like that. It's really the characters that make it entertaining more than anything else. Now let me address, well, no, actually, let me talk about Supergirl, because that'll lead right into the big elephant in the room about these shows. So, oh, and Eldritch, yes, in Legends that Mick and Snart actually grow as characters. That was the evolution of some of these characters, even the ones that, like Sarah Lance, where she started out in Arrow and where she comes to by the time we get to Legends of Tomorrow, even the evolution of Oliver Queen and so on. These are things that you can't do in movies so much without some really drastic events. These are things that have a sort of glacial movement over time. And like, you know, Captain Cold Leonard Snart going from how we meet him in the Arrow. I believe he was first introduced in Arrow. I could be mistaken. If he was first, no, you're right. He was first introduced in The Flash. Yes, I think. But yeah, seeing them go from like villains to sort of anti-heroes, and especially Mick Rory, because he's like sort of the glue that holds everything together by the time we get to season 2 of Legends. Now, Supergirl. Oh boy. So Supergirl is an oddity in the sense that it wasn't a CW show to begin with. It was a CBS show. Now, for some background, Arrow, The Flash, Legends of Tomorrow, these are all broadcast on the CW, which is its own little network, subdivision of the CBS television. But Supergirl herself, her first season was broadcast on CBS proper, and it takes place in a separate reality from the events of Arrow and The Flash and so on. Now, of course, that's not a complete barrier between these shows, because obviously The Flash and various other people can create portals to other dimensions. And this comes into play in the first season of Supergirl when The Flash shows up for an episode, and they have an adventure together and set it up for eventual crossovers in the future. But so Supergirl, first season of Supergirl is a relatively fun show. And just like The Flash, they honor previous versions of the show, specifically going back to Lois and Clark, because Dean Cain, sort of like The Flash, plays the father figure, or the person who raised Supergirl when she was found on Earth by Superman and raised by this adoptive family. Terry Hatcher, who played Lois on Lois and Clark, eventually also shows up in season 2 as a bad guy. So there's lots of callbacks to characters and things from that show as well. The first season of Supergirl is cheesy, but honestly, I found it kind of fun. The most entertaining part of Supergirl season 1 is Cat Grant. For whatever else you might say, that character is consistently entertaining and fun to watch whenever she's in the room. She goes over the top at places, and especially in season 2, but we'll get to that. Season 1 of Supergirl portrayed the character of Supergirl like you wish they would have kind of portrayed Superman in the DC movies to this point, Man of Steel and Dawn of Justice. It is 4-color in the sense that it's bright, and it's very superhero. It's sort of fists on hips, standing up straight. She even rips open her shirt all the time and other stuff. It's cheesy, but it's fun. And I appreciated that. I appreciated that it didn't take itself too seriously, and it was, a comic book TV show, and one in the vein that I would expect from Superman. Now, in this show, you have the supporting characters of Cat. So Supergirl is Kara Danvers. That's her secret identity. She has an adoptive sister named Alex. She works at Catco, which is a magazine, but also apparently like the only broadcast news service on the planet, depending on what part of the storyline we're in at any particular time. And Cat Grant is this, sort of overbearing, know-it-all boss who, of course, has a heart of gold, even though she has a crusty exterior. Kara's best friend at work is this guy named Win Shot, who we find out later is the son of Toyman, I believe it was, supervillain. And also shows up is Jimmy Olsen, Superman's best friend from Metropolis. This all takes place in National City, not Metropolis. And Jimmy Olsen comes to work for Cat Grant as a photographer, and also becomes one of several love interests for Supergirl. If there's one main complaint I have about season 1 of Supergirl, amongst a couple other things, it is the crossover back and forth, will we, won't we, blah, 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 romance stuff. And this doesn't really end in season 1. It carries over into season 2, but good God, you've got like 2 or 3, or depending on the episode, 4 people all vying for Kara Danvers' affection. And it just becomes stupid after a while. So just get over it. Oh, God. Now, the other aspect of this show is that Alex, Kara's adoptive sister, works for the totally secret, and nobody knows it exists, government agency called the DEO, or the Department of Extra Normal whatever, or other earthly things. I don't even know. I can't even remember. The director of this secret organization is a Hank. God, they use his name so infrequently. Hank Henshaw, who is actually the Martian Manhunter in disguise, who's trying to they protect Earth from alien threats. It's such a secret super organization that everybody knows about it. It's the dumbest. It's one of the points of comedy in the show, because they supposedly work for this super CIA type NSA organization that nobody knows exists, and yet anybody and their brother seems to be able to know and show up to this place, their secret headquarters, and talk to them and find out and all this other stuff. Oh boy. And so Supergirl works with this secret organization to, protect the Earth from aliens and alien threats and things like that. The first season is mostly set up. We have a point at which the Flash shows up as a crossover, and they have a little adventure together. So Supergirl. But here's the thing: there's one point, and this is what leads into like the elephant in the room of all these shows. There's one scene in Supergirl season 1, I don't remember where all the main cast are standing in front of Cat Grant. And you've got Jimmy Olsen, who in this iteration is a black man. You've got Kara Danvers. You have Win, and I forget who the other person was. There's like 4 or 5 people standing there. And somebody says, "What do you?" I'm completely paraphrasing here, but somebody says, "What do you think?" And Cat Grant says that you all look like a completely inoffensive cast from a CW show. And it was just this fourth wall breaking nod, or like it's sort of like this diverse, inoffensive cast from a CW show. It was this nod to the sense of what is the undercurrent of a lot of these shows, not in some more than others. In Legends of Tomorrow specifically, and Supergirl specifically, especially season 2, it is the most overt in season 2, is the progressive, we have to let everybody know that women are powerful. We have to, and it is laid on so thick in Supergirl season 2, I got just irritated by it. Now, SDA and I have discussed this before about, how do you write a strong female character and everything else. And, a strong character, it doesn't matter whether they're male or female. If they are an interesting character, if they can stand on their own, then they can be a strong character, even if they're not the one kicking ass. You can have a strong character who is vulnerable, but there is a consistent running theme throughout all these shows where, for the most part, the women can never be put into peril that they themselves cannot get out of on their own in some fashion. And the men, when put up against the women, are always slightly inept. At the very worst, they are slightly inept or overbearing or whatever. Now, this is more difficult to pull off in shows like Arrow and The Flash, where the main character is a man. And so obviously you can't have the main character be weak all the time or be subverted or outdone all the time. Or else you really don't have a main character at that point. But in Legends of Tomorrow, and especially Supergirl, it is laid on relatively thick. There are several overt lines or plot lines that deal with, underestimating women. And the men take a back seat. And even when it's not so overt, it's very pro-women. Now, don't get me wrong. There's no fundamental problem with that. But if you're going to have a show about equality, then you don't denigrate the other side at the same time. And this happens the most blatantly in Supergirl season 2. There are many, many instances where characters will say things like, especially near the end of the season, say things like, well, I'll give you an example. There's a scene near the end of season 2 of Supergirl where Cat Grant, the president of the United States, who is played by Linda Carter, who used to be Wonder Woman, they're both talking to the alien overlord, which is played by Terry Hatcher. And Cat Grant, they're trying to talk the alien overlord queen out of invading Earth. And Cat Grant shows up and says, we can talk about this like civilized people. We're not men. We're not petty. We're not overrun with testosterone. And I'm paraphrasing here, but I'm not by much. We're three strong women, and we can do this. And I was just like, you got to be kidding me. And there's a point at which Supergirl has to fight Superman. And I'll take a tangent real quick. The first 2 episodes of Supergirl season 2 were the best episodes of the whole season because Superman was there. He finally shows up in person. And he is portrayed as Superman should have been portrayed in the movies. It is such so diametrically opposed to the image and attitude and just visual of Superman and Man of Steel and Dawn of Justice that you're like, see, this is what you guys should have been doing. A character that is smiling, he's having fun, he's doing good things, he's in bright colors, he's a superhero. That is the character. That's great. But then, of course, by the end of the season, we have a point at which Superman's mind is taken over, and he has to fight Supergirl. And Supergirl defeats him. And then we have a very, very blunt piece of exposition shortly thereafter, because Superman had been corrupted using a form of kryptonite. And they talk about, well, silver kryptonite, never heard of that before. And Supergirl or one of them says, yeah, I guess you were kind of weakened by it or something. And Superman stops and he says, no, I wasn't weakened at all. I was acting at full strength. You beat me. You're Earth's champion now, or something. And I was just like, Supergirl beat Superman in a fair fight. And now So the Man of Steel just got his ass kicked, and now he's acquiescing, and quite blatantly, to Supergirl in a situation that would totally be within Superman's wheelhouse. Let's see. Go to the chat real quick. The Flash episode. Yeah, we'll get to the Flash. I'll get to the crossover stuff soon. That's its own sort of thing. Let's see. Acts like a child. Let's see. Aethertos says all of them being for the attention of someone who acts like a child. Yeah, there's between Alex, her sister, and Kara, there are moments where they act completely like stupid teenagers. I mean, they're supposed to be like grown adults, but in some of their actions, especially so in season 2, Alex, her sister, discovers that she's gay, and this becomes a super duper plot line because she falls in love with this police detective. Her actions in this relationship, her attitude, her reactions to things, it's so gooey, ooey, like, do adults actually act like this? And I know, again, don't overthink it. You're applying too much logic. You're applying too much real life stuff to this situation than you should for a comic book show. But again, you know, it's this weird balance where they try to say, okay, all but for these fantastical things, we're operating in a real world setting. And yet at any point, they're willing to throw out the real world setting just to satisfy the plot point of the moment, sort of. Let's see. Cummerzant says, man, season 2 of Supergirl just really off the rail. It did. Season 2 of Supergirl went completely all over the place and was just, I was so irritated at Supergirl. She was stupid girl the whole time. I started calling her stupid girl because the way she was acting, the way she was handling problems or treating people, it was like, she's just an idiot. Let's see. Kelvin Robinson says, Supergirl in the comics is stronger than Superman. Oh, okay. She teaches him the Kryptonian martial arts. Oh. Huh. Okay. All right, this is me not knowing these things. So if that's the case, all right. That doesn't really change the overall underlying message of everything else in the series, but okay. It just seemed like they laid that on pretty thick. Let's see. Christoph Modig. Hi, my name is Christopher, and I compose music. Oh. Somebody's putting an ad in my chat. So, no. I'm sorry I even said anything. I don't... Yeah, if you got something you want to promote, you can do that on your own channel. But yeah, Supergirl season 1 was fun. I liked it. It was cheesy, but I had a good time with it. Season 2 of Supergirl was all about telling us that men are inherently weak and awful, and women are super powerful and can never do any wrong, except when they do wrong, but it's not that bad, or something. The main case in point is there's a new, more firm love interest in season 2, who is another alien named Mon-El. And at one point, Supergirl's dad, or adoptive dad, shows up and is rescued after being held in captivity for, you know, years and years and years. And Mon-El is the smart one, saying, isn't this a little bit too convenient? I mean, it's almost like the writers were putting Mon-El there as part of my own brain as I'm watching the show. Isn't this a little too convenient? Shouldn't we not trust him quite yet until we figure out what's going on? Because, you know, give him access to all this information and everything. And of course, because he's the outsider and he's, you know, the entire family and Supergirl and Alex and everybody just demonize him and vilify him and ostracize him. Like, how dare you question or criticize my father, da-da-da-da-da. Of course, he turns out to be right. Completely right. And near the end of the episode, my friend and I, as we're watching the show, we're like, okay, so, hey, Supergirl, you're going to apologize to him now, aren't you? You're going to apologize to him now, aren't you? After treating him like absolute garbage this entire time because he was suspicious, and rightly so, of the situation, because you were too stupid from everything that's occurred prior to this in the 2 seasons not to think that maybe you should be suspicious. You're going to apologize, right? Never does. Never apologizes. And what does Mon-El do? Oh, he fawns over her, rubs her feet, cuddles with her. Oh, you poor thing. Da 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 da. It's like, it just doesn't make any sense. And it's very frustrating to watch. It's just like, there's got to be some give and take. If you want to have a show that shows equality, then you have to have a show that shows equality and not subservient. I mean, if you're trying to say one sex should not be subservient or portrayed as weaker than the other, then, you know, two wrongs don't make a right. They just make a really good excuse, I guess. And so just like, okay, but that was really irritating. Let's see what else we have. Scribe, like, by the way, I picked name out of random generator, but I believe it's Core Mesranth, but I don't actually care. Okay, just making sure. I don't know. It could be Gaelic or something. You know, we got some weird viewers. Let's see. I thought the comic said she only seemed stronger because, unlike Superman, she fought without restraint, and that's why they were always battling each other or something. I don't know. Could be. Eldridge says, I suppose that could make sense. She may have learned some manner of fighting techniques on Krypton as she was, I think, about her early teens when she left. Yeah, that's the thing. She and Superman and she left Krypton at the same time. She was like 12, I think, and he was a baby. But unfortunately, Supergirl got diverted into the Phantom Zone where time doesn't work quite the same way, and she was put in sort of like a stasis field, or time ran faster outside of it than she did inside of it. And when she finally made it to Earth, she was still 12, and Superman had grown up. So that's why there's a time differential in that. Let's see. Okay, so yeah, and like I say, the social justice stuff shows up here and there in specific characters, in specific storylines. There is an anti-gun episode in Arrow that was so out of place. I cannot tell you how out of place that entire episode was. It was so weird. It took such a turn into political, social commentary, and it never came back to it again. I mean, it only in passing reference did anything come out of that. But man, and like a Curtis in Arrow, you know, the black, gay, married, Olympian, computer expert, anything you can imagine. And there were episodes in Legends of Tomorrow where they go back in the past, and of course, legitimately, they have to bring up the fact that, well, one of our teammates is black, and maybe this isn't. I mean, if we're going to be in Germany during World War II, maybe we shouldn't have him outside because he wouldn't fit in, quite literally. These are, you know, decent concerns. There's one where they go back to slave times, and it's like, maybe you guys should stay on the ship. This is not the time in the Civil War for you people that look like you. It's just a fact of life. It's not a commentary on endorsement. It's just a fact of life when you're going back in time like that. And they lay this stuff on really thick. So some episodes are harder to watch than others just for like the cringe factor. But as I say, in the cumulative effect, I enjoyed these shows. But like I said earlier, Supergirl was constructed to stand on its own. At this point, I think it should just stand on its own off in a corner somewhere, because after season 2, I almost never want to see it again. Maybe they'll fix things by season 3, can't tell you. But at least Arrow, Flash, and Legends of Tomorrow all exist because of this shared universe. So how is the universe shared? Well, so far, we have had a couple small and a couple big crossovers with the various characters from these shows. The first one, I'll get it out of the way real quick. The Flash goes to Supergirl's universe, and they have an adventure, and he explains where he's from, and they do some stuff there, and then he goes back to his dimension. In the Flash TV show, it is handled with him blipping out for like 2 seconds as far as his companions see him on camera, so to speak. But for him, he's been gone for a couple of days. And it's very subtle, and I really appreciated that, because I watched these shows separately. I watched all of Arrow first, watched all of Flash second, watched all of Supergirl separate, and then Legends of Tomorrow. So when I got to the point in the Flash, I watched Supergirl first, then I got to Arrow and everything else. When we got to the point in the Flash where he goes to the crossover with Supergirl, in the Flash TV show, it's handled like that. And, you know, you notice that, and he's like, how long have I been gone? Did you guys not see me how long I was gone? No, you just blipped out for a second. Oh, wow, okay. And they just kind of, so I appreciated that sort of like nod to what happened without like spending a lot of time on it. The next one is there's a character, a super villain from the comic books called, Vandal Savage. I was about to say Randy Savage. I was gonna say Randy Savage. Randy Savage. Oh yeah, step into the spice, you know, or something. But no, Vandal Savage, who is this immortal, super villain, and you know, crazy guy. He shows up, and he has a crossover between Arrow and the Flash, where he's this big threat that also introduces Hawkgirl and Hawkman into the mix because they are his. You know, eternal enemies from way back in Egypt or something. They've reimagined. I know a little bit about Hawkgirl and Hawkman, at least their original origins. They've changed the origins of these characters to be like they are effectively Egyptian gods or the avatars of gods in a way, blessed by gods, rather than being from another planet, which I believe was the original origin for them in the comic books. And Vandal Savage isn't some immortal caveman. He too was sort of blessed with radiation or the god's power or whatever, depending on how you look at it, back in Egypt as well. So Vandal Savage threatens like all of reality, more or less, and has a superpower. So he's looking for a super artifact that will help him take over the world and everything. And so the Arrow and the Flash have to team up with all their super friends together to go take out Vandal Savage. And at one point, everybody dies. He kills everybody, but the Flash is able to zip back in time to try to prevent what happened from happening. He screws with the time stream again. And overall, that crossover was okay. I liked it all right. It was okay. But the super big one that happened just this last set of seasons between all four shows was this alien invasion that happens. It's a long story. But aliens invade the Arrowverse, that segment of the reality. And the Flash goes off to find an alien to help them. And so he goes off and recruits Supergirl to come in and help fight these aliens. Aliens that we eventually see a version of showing up in Supergirl Season 2. Now, conceivably, these are different aliens because they're in a different universe. They're just the same kind of aliens. I don't know. I'm not going to go that far into thinking about it too much. But you have this. So there's an episode of The Flash. There's an episode of Arrow. There's an episode of Legends of Tomorrow where they fight these aliens off. There's not an episode in Supergirl so much, except a mentioning of it because that doesn't fit in the continuity. Since she was taken to another universe, they can't really have an episode of Supergirl in a separate universe with none of the other characters there. And as far when you get to the final fight scene, when you get this big, all the superheroes are on this rooftop and they're all fighting the aliens, and they're all like, you got Supergirl flying around with her, shooting her heat vision at people. You got Firestorm flying around. You got Arrow down there. You got the Flash speeding around. It's exactly what you would want from a comic book show. It's like, I wish there was a Marvel equivalent to this where everybody's in their costumes, everybody's running around doing their stuff. Tommy Toons, thank you very much for the donation. Supergirl is too SJW, got bored with it. It got too SJW in season 2. What little there was in season 1 was, forgivable for the most part because, like, okay, this is a girl power show, whatever. That's fine. Hi, Base Mama. I was just watching Matt's video about ISIS, the Muslim superhero who's banned in most Islamic countries. Yeah, so let me look this up real quick, but let me try to address this now because a lot of people have been asking about this, and I meant to look this up for the stream so I could comment on it. But let me find an article on it so I can find out now, like, what the situation is or what the plan is here. Okay, so I'm going to go to our friends, as I usually go to on Lords of the Night. I'm going to go to the Washington. Oh, this is the Washington Times, not the Washington Post. Thank God. Washington Post, yeah. Okay, so the article says, DC's Legends of Tomorrow producer admits Muslim character ISIS is a response to Trump. Okay. Producers for the CW's popular series DC's Legends of Tomorrow had President Trump on their minds when they decided to introduce a Muslim character. Also, there's a lot of sort of sub-commentary in Supergirl Season 2 regarding Trump or voting for the other guy, or the fact that the president in that series is a woman and all this other stuff. A lot of subtext there, but whatever. They want to comment on that, that's fine. The Television Critics Association press tour held this week in Beverly Hills, California, briefly touched on U.S. politics when Legends of Tomorrow executive producers Mark Guggenheim and Phil Klemmer discussed the character Isis, who will be played by actress Tala Ash. I don't know who that is. Quote, "You might have heard there was this election," Variety reported Wednesday after the event. "Not to get political, but something that we all gravitated towards in the writer's room was making this character Muslim. We're all looking toward the day when 2017 is in the history book, and hopefully isn't the last day in the history book," Mr. Klemmer added. Oh, for God's sakes. "Miss Ash's character has nothing to do with the terrorist group ISIS or Islamic State." Yeah, I know, but you're bringing in a character called Isis, who's Muslim, now. The superhero existed for years as a woman who draws power from an Egyptian amulet, although Mark Guggenheim said the injection of religion into the television version's origins was inspired by his sister-in-law. Right, so this is an intentional act, I guess you could say, as a political commentary into the show. We're going to, we brought in a character specifically based on ethnicity and religion to make a political comment on the real world. A political comment that I'm sure will totally stand the test of time which is funny given the show's theme of time travel, between now and whenever somebody watches it 5-10 years from now. Let's see. What do we have in the chat? Let's see. Base Mama says, Isis is a pagan goddess, so she wouldn't be allowed anyway. Too, according to Islam, Isis is a whore who should be stoned, lashed, and probably be beheaded. Forced narrative. Yes. There's a whole lot of things with this little piece of news, which not only bodes ill for what kind of crap we're going to see in season 3 of Legends of Tomorrow, but also the mindsets of the writers. We're going to use our TV show, our comic book adventure, supposed to be fun TV show, to make political statements. Now, like I said, if you want to see how this can go completely off the rails, I believe it was Arrow season 3. I could be mistaken, but the anti-gun episode of Arrow was such a weird and misplaced departure for the series, for the characters, for the situation, that I was taken out completely of the moment of this being a superhero show. Let's see, Aethertoe says, so unless they have to do with the terrorist group, she should be Egyptian. Then again, Egypt is very Muslim-based issues. That is a fine line, I suppose, but you would think that she would be worshiping Egyptian gods if she's Isis. Base Mama says, and Marvel is still scratching their heads and can't figure out why no one wants their shit. At least DC kind of tries to just tell a story most of the time. Yeah, and like I said before, DC has done in the all-around, I enjoyed the DC series more than I enjoyed all the Marvel series. Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. can be a very tough series to be a fan of, given its plotting nature and some of the most recent season with Ghost Rider was probably the most entertaining, but mostly because of Ghost Rider and not so much because of the other characters. Daredevil season 1 is still the standout, one of the best comic book TV series, I think, ever, just as presented. But the Netflix universe, as presented thus far, doesn't hold a candle to not only the volume, but just the overall entertainment value presented in the DC series. Because Netflix does this like one series every 2 years or something, or it's a long time. They're not as, the Netflix series aren't as popcorn, cotton candy based sort of stuff as Arrow and Flashes. You can digest each of these episodes on their own, and they're like, okay, this is fun. You get to see the characters run around. It doesn't take itself too seriously. Netflix takes itself way too seriously, which works for Daredevil, which works for Luke Cage to a certain extent. Jessica Jones, and Iron Fist, holy shit. Let's see. Let's see. Yeah, Tommy Toon says, then she's an apostate. Yeah, I mean, she's drawing her power from an Egyptian amulet connected to the Egyptian gods. Then that's how I'm curious how they're going to square that with, Islam. Base Mama says she is an Egyptian goddess. She was married to the brother of her brother Osiris, god of the dead and resurrection. Incest is best when it's practiced in the family. Kelvin Robinson, didn't Moon Knight get his powers from Isis? No, he got his powers from Khonshu, the god of the moon. And the phases of the moon determined like how powerful he was at any particular time. Let's see. What else we have? Comesranth, you know what I think would have been a good idea if they had updated, not rebooted Witchblade from the 90s? I saw something recently on Witchblade where they're talking about it was a little bit of ahead of its time, but they could. I mean, who knows? Let's see. Base Mama says, Base Mama, who is a former Muslim, just for the sake of anybody who's listening, she knows her stuff. Coincidentally, Allah was also a moon god who bred humanity with his own daughters, so I guess there's some crossover there. Sure. With Moon Knight? Well, yeah, I mean, Moon Knight got his powers in the Middle East, but specifically Egypt when he went to like a temple of Khonshu and got resurrected by the god and all this other stuff. Tommy Toons asks, is there a transgender superhero? I'm sure there is. I'm not sure if there is one in the mainstream Marvel or DC continuities. I'm almost positive there is in some of the smaller comic book companies. Let's see. What else? What else do I want to say about this? Oh, yeah. So I want to reiterate, there are no toilets in any of these shows. The holding cells of the DEO, the holding cells at Star Labs, the jail cells you see in various places, the cells on the ship that Oliver Queen is trapped on, the Amazo, which I thought was funny. Because I know a little bit about DC lore, so these hints and picks in yeah, there are no toilets. They hold these people in these things for God knows how long, and nowhere to go to the bathroom. It's just the case. What else? Yeah, I guess I'll open it up for chat for a few minutes, and then I'll close up shop because I think I've said in I understand sort of a rambling way what I thought about these shows. Different seasons are better than others. Flash season 3 was certainly more emotionally powerful than Flash season 2. And I like some characters more than others. Cisco grew on me, took a while. I love Mick Rory. I love Leonard Snart as they've developed. I like Barry Allen. I like that character. I like Oliver Queen. These characters really have grown on me after binging them this long and sort of getting sort of a stake in the things. There are weak points, as all shows do. You have to cover 23 episodes, depending on the series. Legends of Tomorrow, I think, only does about 20 or 17 or something. But they are, episodic in nature. But these shows benefit from the binge watching era in the sense that the writers know they have to have a cohesive, long-form plot line connecting everything together. They can't rely on just each episode being its own thing necessarily, but also a larger whole. And just as something I will mention, the actress who plays Lena Luthor in Supergirl season 2, hot. Oh my God, she's gorgeous. I guess she's done other stuff too. That's the first time I'd ever seen her before. But oh man, let's see. So going back to your questions and things. Base Mama says, I wish they'd just write good characters with interesting backstories, fair opponents, and good story arcs. Why is that all so much to ask these days? Because everybody has to make a statement, and everybody wants to take advantage of the platform they have to send out the message they want to send, or virtue signal, or... Excuse me, I was taking a drink. Or project a world that they'd like to see since they have the power of gods as writers over this stuff. And, that's their prerogative. It doesn't necessarily make for good entertainment, but that's their prerogative. Let's see. Aether Toast says, the way Marvel is now, the either is or will be a horrific stereotype of a trans superhero. Yeah, I don't know how the mainstream comics would handle a character like that. I don't know. I couldn't tell you. Let's see. Base Mama says they can't let them have toilets. Then they can't stop them making jailhouse wine. Oh, God. And Jesse says no trial or nothing. Just lock them up. Yeah, that's the other thing, too. And that's one of the sort of like morally questionable things in some places. They just take these guys extrajudicial and just lock them up, especially the supervillains in Flash. Just like, yeah, we'll just kind of hold them in our lab without putting them through due process. Just, nobody will care. Let's see. Sinister Mind says, seriously, it makes me wonder if the USA hasn't reverted back to Puritan standards. You might think that, but there's a lot of, especially early on in the Arrow series, there's some pretty overt sexuality going on in a lot of places. There's not really, especially with Black Canary's cleavage the first time around. It's like, oh boy, cleavage. Let's see. Eldridge says, I would like to see a transgender hero at either Marvel or DC, just so long as they don't change an existing character to make them. Yes, make a new character. This is the thing that always, and we've talked about this before on the Lords of the Night stream. Stop renaming or rebranding old characters with new people and everything. Rarely does that make any sense. And changing the gender or changing the race or something. I mean, and when I say rarely, it's like, well, if Tony Stark died, if they killed him off and Rhodey became Iron Man, I'd be fine with that because Rhodey's been part of the storyline for decades. And it'd be like, okay, he's his best friend. Why wouldn't he be? He's War Machine. He could take over the role as Iron Man. If you have a natural successor to a title or something, like Bucky becomes Captain America or something, then sure. But just doing it to do it, no, don't. Let's see. Tommy Toon says, maybe they have a toilet that comes out of the wall, like there's a button somewhere. Could be. Never seen it. Let's see. Base Mama says they have, but the Puritans call themselves progressives now. Very true. Shady Grin says, 2 shows rumored to be in the works, Witchblade, Moon Knight. Moon Knight I would love, because, man, if they did that right, that would be so cool. And if one show is willing to put ISIS on, then I think that actually opens the way for Moon Knight, which has nothing to do with being Islamic and has no sort of political reflexes to it. But yes, Moon Knight can only be done on a series, and really Netflix would be the only place for it. Commiseranth 1, Scribe Light, random question, but I don't understand, maybe I'm just ignorant, but the whole wanting Doctor Who to become a transgender, didn't that just happen anyways technically? Well, as far as I understand it, I'm no Doctor Who aficionado, but it has been pre-established that a Time Lord can switch sexes in the course of their regeneration. So this plot element, so to speak, is technically nothing new in the established canon. It's just new for this character, Doctor Who, to become a woman. So yes, I suppose you could say in that sense that Doctor Who is now a transgender superhero, in a sense. Let's see. Sorry, having to scroll up here a little bit. Let's see. Wait, they made Lionel Luthor a girl? No. Lex Luthor exists in this show. Lionel Luthor existed in this show. I think he died at some point. But Lex Luthor's conveniently adoptive sister, Lena Luthor, now runs LexCorp, now just called L Corp, as a good guy, ostensibly. They're, whatever. Lex is in jail. Yeah. Base Mama says, I agree with Eldrix. I don't know why they have made Thor a girl when Freya was already there. Yeah, exactly. Why don't you take, or like Sif, why don't you give Sif her own series or something? Or like Thor goes into exile and Sif has to not become Thor, but just become Guardian of Asgard or something. I don't know. Let's see. Can we get the Shadow TV show? I've heard that that's been being worked on, or a Shadow movie or something. Shadow's a tough one, too, because it's all period piece. It's a very dated character, and I think the results of the Lone Ranger movie might make people a little wary of trying to invest in old radio show characters. Base Mama says, stop appropriating characters and tinkering with them until they suck so hard that no one ever touches them again. It's like they're trying to kill the Marvel Universe. Well, the Marvel Comics themselves, the company, is not doing themselves any favors. That's true. Eldra says they ruined Iceman. I know only peripherally about Iceman, so I won't comment too much. Base Mama says, I was such a devotee of X-Men. Gambit was always my favorite. I legit had a crush on him as a kid. Remy LeBeau. If only they could have gotten him right in one of the movies so far. Although apparently they are still working on a Gambit movie, a Gambit standalone movie. I forget who is supposed to be playing Gambit. I think it's Magic Mike. The guy who plays Magic Mike, 21 Jump Street, that guy's supposed to be playing Gambit. I don't know if that's a good choice or not. Hey, Scribe, hey, everyone. Hey, Puppy Hater. Let's see. Sinister Mind says, Iceman had the most potential to be the uber badass of all Marvel. Let's see. Tommy Toon says, they're so worried about being humane and progressive but have no due process. It doesn't make sense. Yeah, in the TV shows, this is one of the things, like I said, Arrow murders people and then tries to stand as a defender against murderers. You know, they hold people in cells and cages and stuff, the DEO and everything. Yeah. Oh, you know who was missing from season 2 of Supergirl? Maxwell Lord. I mean, I don't think he died in season 1, and I thought he was going to be like the Lex Luthor of the Supergirl universe, but they just kind of poofed him away. I guess they had to make room for Alex's girlfriend rather than having that sort of quasi maybe romance they were starting in season 1. Base Mama says, Scribe should start his own comics franchise, Scribbles, Comics, and Spicy Memes. Yeah. I actually made up a comic book character when I was a kid. Long time ago. I would discuss it, but unfortunately it's out there in some corners of the internet, and I don't want to risk giving anything away on it. Let's see. Eldra says, to clarify, I think the character of Iceman is okay still, but the solo comic is more about Iceman being gay and nearly incompetent. Oh, yeah, that's right. They did retcon Iceman into being gay. That's right. Let's see. Rotten Corpse says, I heard that a few years ago... Oh, I'm sorry. You're responding to somebody else. Let's see. Sinister Mind. Sinister Mind says, I'm assuming talking about Iceman, he could stop all movement on an atomic level and reform matter with water in it. Yeesh. That's kind of godlike. Did that Gambit movie get canceled? Kellen Robinson says. That was rumored to, but I keep hearing things that it's still being worked on, so it might be in development hell at this point. Scribe, Jimmy Olsen casting as anti-ginger. Yeah, yeah. Well, it's anti-hair because the character's bald. We don't want any. It's anti-follicle or follicophobic. Follicophobic, whatever. Well, okay, guys, I'm going to end it there. I've rambled on long enough. I appreciate everybody who came out to listen to me babble on about this for a bit. I'm more than happy to answer any other questions, or if you have any other questions or comments or anything, by all means, if you're listening to this later on, put them into the comment section below. I'll be keeping an eye on that stuff. Yeah, I just want to end with, I mean, if you haven't seen these shows and you're thinking about it, I would recommend watching them. Some are tougher than others, and in some places maybe my perspective on some plot lines or characters or things are just skewed by my second day job doing YouTube stuff. But in the overall, they are enjoyable. They are visual comic books in the sense of the classic notion of what comic books should be. You have larger than life characters. You've got some darkness on one side. You've got brightness on the other. You got some in between. You got some fun. The special effects for a TV show, I got to say, are pretty good. Some of the villains are really fun. Some of the interactions are good. Overall, like I say, DC has got TV down. Marvel's got the movies down. And neither company has their opposite number down quite as well as the other one does. DC should really stop making movies, except, well, Warner can't stop making movies, but they should pour way more money into developing shows like the ones we see on CW. I wouldn't necessarily put them all in the hands of the writers of Supergirl and now Legends of Tomorrow, but like I say, those first early seasons of Arrow and and The Flash really hit it on the head for me. And it takes a little bit of getting used to, but it's all right. Let's see. Jesse Green, great show. Scribe, thank you so much, Jesse. Base Mama says, that's why I put off my career prospects until after I raised the kids. I was aware that my time to do that was very finite. Okay. Anyway, guys, thanks so much. I will be, as usual, on Lords of the Night tonight at 9 p.m. Eastern with Ranting Monkey and SDA. Hope to see you there. And again, I am more than excited to talk about and gab about comic book DC stuff in the chat below if you have any questions or any opinions of your own. And yeah, we'll see what happens because the next seasons are coming out in the near future. I probably won't see them until after they're released on Netflix because I'll be avoiding that stuff because I want to be able to binge it. I don't want to have to wait a week kind of thing. So I won't know what happens next until after it's all available, which these days is pretty much the day after the season concludes. So once that happens and I finish up the new seasons, I'll probably do another one of these to review that. So anyway, have a good day, guys. Thanks so much for coming out, and I'll talk to you soon. Take care.